I had just poured my second cup of coffee of the morning when I accidentally read a text message that wasn't meant for me, and the world as I knew it quietly, irreversibly split in two. I didn't know it yet as I sat at Eleanor's kitchen table on that bright Sunday afternoon in October, but the message glowing on the screen of her phone would unravel not just my marriage, but a scheme so cold and premeditated that it would take me weeks to fully understand the depth of it. The text was short, 5 words really, plus an address. But those 5 words were enough to confirm every quiet, half-formed fear I had ever allowed myself to push aside. Here's the address. Don't delay. The key is under the porch. Don't tell your husband. There it was. Not a typo, not a misunderstanding. The sender was my mother-in-law, Eleanor Marsh, and the recipient was someone named R. Hammond. And the address she had given him, without my knowledge, without Jason's knowledge, without anyone's knowledge, was the address of my home, the house my grandmother had left me, the one thing in this world that was entirely, irrevocably mine. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the version of my life I believed I was living before that October afternoon, to the quiet, sun-drenched ordinary of it, because that ordinariness matters. It's what makes what came next so devastating. I had always loved autumn in that house, the way the light came through the kitchen window in long, amber slants, warming the worn oak of the countertops and catching the dust motes floating above the table where my grandmother used to sit. The house was old, built in the 1940s, 2 stories, wraparound porch, a backyard that backed up against a small creek. It was not glamorous. The upstairs bathroom had a crack in the tile that had been there since I was 6 years old. The radiators clanked in November. One of the porch steps had a soft spot that you learned to step over, and guests always needed to be warned about it. But it was mine. More than mine. It was her. It was my grandmother, Ruth, who had lived there for 53 years and who had pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand on a Tuesday morning 3 years before she died, when she was still sharp and warm and smelling of lavender and hand cream. "This is yours when I'm gone," she had said. Not sadly, but firmly, the way she said everything that mattered. Not your mother's, not your cousin Patrice's, yours. You've always understood this house, Clara. You've always known what it is. I had cried and told her not to talk about dying, and she had clicked her tongue at me the way she always did and poured us both more tea, and the afternoon settled back into its ordinary gold. The house transferred to me cleanly, through a will that had been prepared by her longtime attorney, a careful man who had known my grandmother for decades and who had made absolutely sure everything was in order. There was no dispute, no drama, no complications. It was simply mine. The way the sun rose, the way water flowed downhill. I had never thought to question it. I had never imagined anyone else would either. Jason moved in with me after we married 3 years ago, and that part, at least in the beginning, had been genuinely beautiful. He loved the house, too, or he said he did, and in those first years, I believed him completely. He refinished the floors in the second bedroom, repainted the front shutters a deep sage green, fixed the soft step on the porch one Saturday in March with a precision and patience that made me stand in the doorway watching him and think, this is it. This is the life. He was an architect by training, and he had an eye for old structures, a respect for their eccentricities and their endurance, and he called the house Clara's grandmother, with a kind of easy affection that made me feel understood in the deepest way, understood not just as a person, but as someone who came from somewhere, who carried something. Those early years of marriage, and I want to be honest about this, they were good. The mornings were good. The winters curled up by the radiator were good. The small, patient routines of 2 people building a life together in a house that had already held 50 years of other lives, all of that was genuinely, quietly good. Eleanor, however, was a complication I had learned to absorb the way you learn to absorb chronic low-grade noise, by simply integrating it into the background of daily life until you stop noticing it consciously. She was Jason's mother, which meant she would always be present, and I had made my peace with that years before we married. She was a trim woman in her early 60s, elegantly put together, with silver hair she wore in a precise chignon and a wardrobe of jewel-toned cardigans paired with pressed slacks and low heels, always coordinated, always immaculate. She had the bearing of someone who expected to be listened to, and most people did listen, because she delivered her opinions in the smooth, reasonable tones of a woman who had never once been told she was wrong about anything important. She was not openly hostile to me. That would have been too simple, and Eleanor was not a simple woman. She was warm in the surface layer, the way a lake can feel warm at the top while the depths below stay cold and dark and perfectly still. She brought hostess gifts when she visited: good wine, fresh flowers, a jar of artisanal jam, and a hand-tied ribbon. She asked about my work with genuine-seeming interest, tilting her head at the right moments, offering small affirmations. She told Jason in front of me that he had done very well, which was framed as a compliment and landed as something considerably more conditional, something I felt in my sternum rather than heard in my ears. She was, in the vocabulary of these things, a difficult woman who never once gave you anything concrete enough to actually object to. The first time she mentioned the house in a way that lodged in my chest like a splinter was about 2 years into our marriage. We were sitting on the porch in late August, the three of us, and the evening was golden and easy, and I remember feeling something close to real contentment. The warm boards of the porch under my bare feet, the smell of the creek drifting up through the yard, the particular satisfaction of a summer evening that knows it is nearly over and has made peace with that. Eleanor had been asking about my work, and I had answered, and then she had turned and looked at the house with an expression I couldn't quite read. It was not admiration exactly. It was something more proprietary than that. The way you look at a thing you are already calculating. "You know," she said in the mild and thoughtful way she said things she had already decided, "a house like this is really a working asset. Have you two given any thought to what you'll do with it long term?" I remember glancing at Jason. He was looking at his glass. "We live in it," I said, keeping my voice easy. "Long term, we plan to keep living in it." Eleanor smiled. The smile did not reach her eyes. It was a precise, sharp arc of her lips, practiced and controlled. "Of course," she said. "I only mean a property like this in this neighborhood has appreciated considerably in the past few years. It would be a shame not to think strategically about it." "I don't tend to think of my grandmother's house as an asset to be strategic about," I said, and there was something in my voice I couldn't fully smooth out, something that landed in the air between us like a small stone dropped in still water. "Of course," Eleanor said again pleasantly. "You're sentimental about it. That's lovely." That was all. Jason refilled the glasses and asked about a film she'd mentioned wanting to see, and the evening resolved into the ordinary pleasantness it had been before. But the splinter stayed. I felt it, that small, sharp thing, for days afterward. I told myself I was being oversensitive, that Eleanor was simply the kind of woman who spoke in terms of strategy and assets, who could not look at anything without calculating its value, and that it wasn't personal. Not really. I told myself that, and I mostly believed it, because the alternative, that she was thinking specifically, deliberately, about what could be done with my grandmother's house, was something I wasn't quite ready to hold in both hands and examine in full light. Over the following year, there were other comments, each one as oblique and easy to dismiss as the first. She asked once, over dinner, whether I had had the property assessed recently. And when I said I didn't think in those terms, she made the small sound she made when she encountered something naive. She mentioned, seemingly in passing during a phone call with Jason that I caught the tail end of, something about the equity situation and what would happen if things changed. I was in the kitchen doorway with a stack of folded towels in my arms, and I stood there not breathing, and I heard Jason say in a low, careful voice, "Mom, it's not the right time." Not, "That's not our house." Not, "We're not having that conversation." Just, not the right time. As though there were a right time. as though the question itself were legitimate and the only issue was its timing. I walked back to the bedroom and put the towels away and stood looking at the ceiling for a long moment, and I told myself it meant nothing. I was good at that at the time. I was very, very good at it. Then came the October Sunday. We had driven to Eleanor's for lunch, a routine we kept every few weeks, a standing arrangement that had calcified over time from invitation into obligation, from obligation into something closer to weather, unavoidable, shapeable only in small ways, best endured with appropriate clothing. Eleanor lived 40 minutes from us, in a newer development, a tidy condo with cream carpets and framed botanical prints, and a kitchen that always smelled of something just finished baking. She was a good cook. The lunches were always good. I had long since mastered the art of being present at her table without being entirely there, of smiling at the right moments, passing the bread, answering questions about my work with precisely the right level of detail, enough to seem open, not enough to give her anything to work with. It was after the meal, in the slow and slightly drowsy interlude between the plates being cleared and the coffee being made, that Eleanor asked if anyone had seen her phone. She'd set it down somewhere, she thought. The kitchen counter, maybe, or the hall table. Jason got up to check the living room, and I offered, since I was already standing, to look in the kitchen. That was all it was. I was doing her a favor. I was being a good daughter-in-law. Her phone was on the counter beside the coffee maker, screen lit up with notifications. I was about to pick it up and carry it out to her. I was not snooping, I want that on record. I was not looking for anything. When the name in the notification preview registered in the corner of my eye. R. Hammond. 2 letters and a surname, and something in me went completely, immediately still. I don't know why I paused. I genuinely do not know what instinct recognized that name as significant before I had any reason to believe it was. But I paused, and I read the preview visible on the lock screen, and it was enough. It was more than enough. Here's the address. Don't delay. The key is under the porch. Don't tell your husband. The key is under the porch. There was only one porch with a hidden key that Eleanor could possibly know about. Jason had mentioned it to her months ago in the casual and thoughtless way you mention small domestic details to family. We keep a spare under the second step, the loose one, Mom, just so you know, in case you ever need to get in. And I had thought nothing of it at the time. Of course he'd told her. It was practical. It was kind, even. And now here was Eleanor, texting someone whose name I didn't recognize, giving them the address of my house, telling them exactly where to find the key, and explicitly instructing them not to breathe a word of it to my husband. My hands did not shake. I want to record that clearly because I think it matters. My hands did not shake. Not yet. What happened was stranger and quieter than shaking. The room contracted. The smell of Eleanor's kitchen, that particular combination of baked pastry and the faintly chemical sweetness of her countertop spray, pressed in close and thick. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on the street outside. Somewhere in the living room, Jason was laughing at something his mother had said, and her laughter reached me as if from a considerable distance, thinned and slightly distorted, like a radio station losing its signal at the very edge of its range. I set her phone down. I poured the coffee. My hands were steady. My mind was a cold, bright, absolute blankness. Not the blankness of emptiness, but of overload, of a system that has just received more than it can process and has shut down every non-essential function to direct everything toward a single question. What is this? I carried the coffee to the table. I sat down. I smiled when Eleanor smiled at me. I asked whether she wanted 1 sugar or 2, as though I did not already know, as though asking the question gave me something to do with my mouth and my hands and the part of my brain that was not, in that moment, quietly dismantling everything I had believed to be true about my life. I watched her pour the cream into her cup and stir it with a small silver spoon and tell Jason about a neighbor whose dog had gotten into her garden again, and I thought, she has no idea I saw it. She has no idea at all. That thought was the only advantage I had, and I held it the way you hold something fragile and absolutely essential. very carefully, with both hands, not letting it touch anything that might shatter it. The drive home was 40 minutes of peripheral vision. Jason drove and hummed along with something on the radio and talked about whether we should have the furnace serviced before the first frost. I agreed with everything he said. I looked out at the October afternoon, at the orange and rust of the trees, against a sky that had gone pale and thin at the edges, and I assembled what I knew into something I could think with. The address was mine. The key location was something Eleanor had heard Jason mention in passing and had evidently stored with a purpose I had not understood at the time. R. Hammond was not a personal name. There was a formality to those initials, something that suggested letterhead and a nameplate on a desk and a carefully maintained professional distance. And the most important detail of all, don't tell your husband. Whatever Eleanor had arranged, whatever she had sent this person to do inside my home while neither Jason nor I was there, she had wanted it kept not only from me, but from her own son. When we got home, I changed out of my lunch clothes and went to the small desk in the upstairs room, the room that had been my grandmother's sewing room once, that smelled faintly and permanently of old wood and something floral I had never been able to identify. And I opened my laptop. I sat for a moment with my hands resting on the keyboard, looking at the blank search bar, and then I typed, R. Hammond, our city attorney. The results came back in seconds. Raymond Hammond, attorney at law. The website was clean, professional, minimal, gray and white, a brief biography, a clear list of practice areas, estate planning, property law, contested inheritances. I read those 3 phrases 3 times slowly. The way you reread something you hope might change meaning if you look at it long enough. It did not change. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet of the upstairs room and listened to Jason moving around downstairs. The familiar knock of cabinet doors, the running tap, the creak of the 3rd floorboard in the hallway that I knew as well as my own heartbeat. And I thought, he does not know. He cannot know. Because if he knew, and if the man I had married was still in any meaningful sense the man I believed him to be, he would have told me. He would have warned me. However clumsily, however imperfectly, he would have said something. I held that thought for a long time. Then I let myself ask the other question, the one I had been keeping at the far edge of the room where I didn't have to look at it directly. But what if he does know? I lay awake that night long after Jason's breathing had steadied beside me. The radiators ticked as they cooled. The creak made its quiet sound in the dark below the yard. I lay on my side facing the window and I thought about everything methodically. The way my grandmother had taught me to think when I was afraid. Write down what you know, then write down what you need to know, then go and find it. By the time the thin gray light of early morning began to seep under the curtains, I knew exactly what I had to do. I went to see my father the following Tuesday. I told Jason I had an early meeting downtown, left at 7:30, and drove 40 minutes in the opposite direction to my father's office. He was a retired corporate attorney who still consulted part-time from a quiet office above a bookstore. And I sat across from him at the old walnut desk and told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which had always been one of his great gifts. And when I finished, he was quiet for a moment. And then he said, "You need to find out if Hammond has already filed anything." The speed of his response told me that some version of this had already occurred to him. He had absorbed it cleanly, which meant he had been waiting. He asked if Eleanor had ever inquired directly about the title, the deed, the will. I thought about it. She had asked twice whether the transfer had gone smoothly, and I had thought she was making conversation. My father nodded slowly and picked up his phone, and I sat in the old leather chair that smelled of books and my childhood and watched the light fall through dusty Venetian blinds, and I tried very hard not to feel the thing that was building in my chest. What my father's colleague found, within 24 hours, was worse than I had imagined, and yet, in some cold, clarifying way, exactly what some part of me had already known was coming. Raymond Hammond had filed a preliminary claim 2 weeks prior on behalf of a client identified as E. Marsh, asserting that the transfer of my grandmother's property had been executed under undue influence, that Ruth, had not been of sound and independent mind when she signed her updated will, and that the legitimate heir was, in fact, my mother. My mother, who had not spoken to me in 4 years, following a falling out I had believed long buried. My mother, who had been in contact with Eleanor Marsh for the better part of a year. I read the document in my father's office, and I felt the floor perform its trick. That nauseating, slow tilt, the sensation of a world that has quietly, without announcement, realigned itself beneath you. My hands were flat on the desk. My father said my name. I looked up. "There's more," he said, and his voice was very careful. "Hammond has an affidavit from Jason." The ticking of the clock on my father's desk was very loud. I heard it clearly. Each individual tick, separate and distinct, marking off seconds in a room that had gone completely still. "An affidavit saying what?" I said. My voice was flat and quite steady, which surprised me even as I heard it. Saying that, in his observations, Ruth showed signs of cognitive decline in the 18 months before her death, and that she frequently expressed uncertainty about her wishes regarding the property. My father set the document on the desk between us, and I looked at Jason's signature at the bottom of the page, his clean architectural handwriting, the J looping slightly to the right the way it always did, and I thought, he did this. He sat down somewhere, probably in Eleanor's cream-carpeted living room, and he signed his name to this, and then he came home and made dinner and fixed the furnace and slept beside me in my grandmother's house and said nothing. That was the moment the temperature inside me changed. Not a wave of heat, nothing so imprecise as that. What I felt was a cold so complete and so clarifying that everything extraneous simply fell away, and what remained was absolutely clear. I was not a woman who was hurt. I was a woman with a problem, and problems had solutions, and I intended to find mine. I did not go home that evening. I called Jason and told him I was staying at my friend Diane's, not unusual enough to alarm him, and I drove to her apartment and sat on her kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and told her everything while she made tea she knew I wouldn't drink and sat across from me and listened. Diane had known me since college. She had been a bridesmaid at my wedding. She had met Eleanor 4 times and had said after the 4th, with the quiet certainty she brought to things she had observed carefully, "Clara, that woman is building something. I don't know what it is yet, but she's building something." I had told her she was imagining things. I thought about that now, sitting on her kitchen floor, and I felt something that occupied the exact space between grief and fury. "What do you need?" Diane said. Not a question, a statement. "I need to know everything that happened inside my house when I wasn't there," I said, "and then I need to take this apart piece by piece." The security camera had been Jason's idea, installed 6 months prior during a string of package thefts on our street. It was small, positioned above the porch, angled to cover the front door and steps. Jason had set it up, shown me the app, and we had both promptly forgotten about it, the way you forget about something that becomes part of the background. I sat in Diane's car at 7 in the morning, and I opened the app, and I scrolled back through the footage. He had come on a Wednesday 3 weeks ago at 10:47 in the morning while I was at work and Jason was at a site meeting, a man in a dark jacket, briefcase, moving with the practiced ease of someone who knew exactly where he was going. He went directly to the second porch step. He knew precisely which one. He lifted the board, took the key, let himself in, and was inside for 1 hour and 14 minutes. When he came out, he had a folder under his arm. He replaced the key. He walked to a dark blue sedan and drove away. 1 hour and 14 minutes inside my home, inside my grandmother's house, with a key my mother-in-law had provided, on instructions from a plan my husband had contributed to with his own signature, while I sat in my office 20 minutes away believing my life was intact. I called my father from the car. He answered on the second ring. "I have footage," I said. I came home that evening. Jason was in the kitchen, making pasta, and he looked up when I came through the door with the particular expression I had always found endearing. Open, slightly uncertain, as though he was always just a little surprised and pleased to see me. I looked at his face and I thought about the affidavit and I thought about his signature and I put my bag down on the hall table and I said very quietly, "I need you to sit down." He knew. I could see it in the way his hands went still above the pot. The expression on his face shifted, not to guilt, not immediately, but to something that looked almost like relief, as though he had been carrying this particular weight for a very long time and was exhausted by the carrying of it. He turned off the burner. He sat down. I sat across from him in my grandmother's chair, and I put the printed still from the security footage on the table between us. "His name is Raymond Hammond," I said. "He was in our house for over an hour 3 weeks ago, with a key your mother gave him, in connection with a legal challenge to my ownership of this property that you signed an affidavit to support. Tell me I'm wrong about any part of that." Jason looked at the photo for a long time. "She said it was just a formality," he said. "She said the attorney just needed to see the property. She said it wasn't going to affect anything." His voice had the shape of a man who had been rehearsing these words and had discovered, now that he said them aloud, that they held no weight at all. "You signed a legal document stating that my grandmother was not of sound mind," I said. "You let a man into our home, my home, using a key he should never have had, and you said nothing to me. You looked at my face every single morning and you said nothing." I paused. "She talks about things, and then she does them. Yes, I know exactly how she is. The question, Jason, is whether you do." His silence was its own answer. Not a denial, not a protest, just a long, terrible stillness. The confrontation with Eleanor was 2 days later. My father came with me, not to speak, but to be present, which is its own kind of power. I put the footage still on her coffee table, the filed claim beside it, my grandmother's will on top with the attorney's cover letter that documented Ruth's clear and witnessed mind in language that left no room for reinterpretation. "This will be dismissed," I said, "and you know it. What it generates if you continue is a counter-complaint for harassment, tortious interference, and, depending on what Hammond removed from this property during his unauthorized visit, potentially breaking and entering." Eleanor's face had shed its warmth entirely. What was underneath was exactly what I had always half known was there: cold, patient, and not used to losing. "I am protecting my son's interests," she said. "That house should be in this family." "It is in this family," I said. "I am his wife. I am your daughter-in-law. Unless what you mean is that it should be under your control specifically. In which case, say that clearly, so my father can hear it." She did not say it. She withdrew the filing. Raymond Hammond sent the paperwork by Friday. The months that followed were not easy. Jason had to choose, slowly, imperfectly, at real cost, who he intended to be. Eleanor lost her legal fees, her son's automatic loyalty, and the story she had always told herself about her own motivations. These were not small losses. I did not celebrate them. Losses that come from a plan collapsing always fall on more people than the one who made the plan. It is late spring now, 7 months later. I am sitting on the porch of my grandmother's house, my house, with a cup of good coffee, the morning warm around me and the creek running high through the yard below. The second step is solid under my feet. Jason replaced the board last month, quietly, without making anything of it. The spare key is no longer under the porch. I know where it is, and that is the only thing that matters. My grandmother told me once, over tea at this same table, that a house knows who belongs to it. I understand that now. Belonging is not a document or a signature or anyone else's permission or plan. It is something you carry in your body, something you know without being told, something that does not require anyone's approval to be true. The creek runs. The coffee is good. The house holds the way it always has, the way it always will.